Welcome to today's program, AI Literacy, Workforce Training, and the Department of Labor's Framework. My name is Bruna Escoria Bru, and I am the Social Chair of BHBA's Labor and Employment section. And I am happy to introduce our speakers today, Sheila, Abron, and Karen Odash. So I'm going to read a little bit about their experience before I pass along for them to start the presentation. So Karen is an associate in Fisher Phillips, Philadelphia and Minneapolis offices, where she advises employers on a broad range of labor and employment matters, with a particular focus on the rapidly evolving intersection of artificial intelligence and the workplace as a key member of the firm's AI team. Her practice spans AI compliance and risk mitigation, Title VII discrimination and harassment defense, restrictive covenant and trade secret litigation, and representation of clients in district and appellate courts, as well as hundreds of FINRA arbitrations. Before entering private practice, Karen spent a decade at a nationally recognized securities broker-dealer, rising to Director of Legal Programs, where she advised leadership on high-stakes employment issues and helped develop national risk management policies and workforce programs. Sheila is a partner also at Fisher Phillips, where she is certified as a specialist in employment and labor law by the South Carolina Supreme Court and serves as chair of the firm's government contracting, compliance, and reporting practice group, representing companies and educational institutions in matters ranging from hiring and discrimination to OFCCP compliance and wage and hour class action. Wage and hour class actions. A recognized leader in both the legal profession and her community, she's a past president of the National Conference of Women's Bar Associations, the South Carolina Women Lawyers Association, and the South Carolina Bar Young Lawyers Division, and has been honored with distinctions including the ABA's Top 40 Under 40 Top 40 Under 40, the Leadership in Law Award, and consistent recognition in the South Carolina Super Lawyers. Prior to practicing law, Sheila gained experience in employment matters as a store leader for a Fortune 500 retail company. Thank you so much for presenting this program today, and I'm going to pass along you to start. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bruna. Really appreciate the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Karen and I are so excited to be here with you today. We are hoping to have an AI discussion today with you that's going to be a little bit different than I think what AI discussions have been kind of in the general populace. Typically, especially in the legal realm and the employment realm, we have been heavily focused on AI from a compliance standpoint, from a risk standpoint, from governance, and from vendor management. But today, Karen and I are going to talk to you about the Department of Labor's AI literacy framework, and that really focuses on workforce readiness, employee capability, and AI literacy. So our goal today is to explain the framework, to discuss practical implications for employers, and discuss the roles of AI and attorneys in adoption of this governance. If you will jump back a couple slides, Karen, I want to tell everyone about the disclaimer. We're all lawyers here in the legal and compliance space, so I got to tell you, this program is informational purposes only. It doesn't necessarily represent the position or opinions of the firm, its partners or attorneys, or the Beverly Hills Bar Association, and it doesn't create an attorney-client relationship between Fisher Phillips and anyone here. As we go to the next slide, which you guys have kind of seen, which is these lovely pictures of myself and Karen, but you can see our faces here. One of the reasons that this topic was of such interest, not only because it's trending in the space, and Karen and I spent a lot of time looking at the cutting edge nature of how AI kind of intersects with employment laws, but because of this new framework from the Department of Labor, which takes a different approach at how we look at it. We have known since AI has kind of become more and more prevalent, and specifically generative AI with the launch of ChatGPT and Claude and all of those different platforms. We know that since that time, AI has become increasingly embedded in our framework, in our day-to-day lives. In our personal lives, people are using AI to do a ton of different things, whether it's creating grocery lists, streamlining communications and interpersonally. At work, we know that our employees are using AI to draft communications, to summarize information, to create presentations, to analyze data. Companies have created kind of their own AI tools that they use internally. There are a host of AI tools that come through vendors that employers can use and that employees in the workforce can use. And so it really is becoming more and more integrated into really the daily function of our lives and the daily function of what we're seeing from an employment standpoint. This DOL framework, so it's from the Department of Labor, is really going to focus on AI's adoption that's already occurring and some best practices of how to use it. And the focus really is not whether employees should use AI. The presumption is that employees are already using it, and how can employers provide a literacy and some communication and some education around that particular use. So today we are going to be talking about that DOL framework. We're going to be talking about some recommendations and some practical considerations. And so while we're here on this agenda slide, we will be talking more precisely about why AI literacy matters, the overview of the DOL's framework, some foundational competencies that have been identified by the Department of Labor, the 7 delivery principles for employers, and some practical takeaways and some governance considerations. So the focus here will be how you can advise your clients. And this is really critically important because when we think about how AI is impacting our workforce, you can think about how different types of advents in technology and change have become pretty relevant and important. If we think about computer literacy, when did computers start becoming such a critical and crucial part of what we do on a day in and day out basis? And if you remember, coming up with how to be having a literacy framework of how to use computers and how to use them properly and what are proper protocols and tools, this is not very different from that. Similarly, when we talked about having the advent of internet, if there are folks on this line that, remember working pre-internet or going to school pre-internet, having to develop what that literacy and competency looks like in that area, or digital literacy. And so the frameworks that we're going to talk about today really focus on ensuring that the worker, the average employee, the average worker has a baseline literacy competency. And we're not talking about a technical expertise as we're talking about this. It's a competency and an understanding of what AI can do and what it should be doing and how employees can be using it. We know that our employees are already experiencing authorized and unauthorized use of AI. And so having this framework really encourages employers to meet this need head on and create this guidance and development and training and framework here about this. The DOL has said, every worker needs baseline AI literacy skills to succeed, regardless of the industry that they are going to be in. So Karen is going to tell us a little bit about the framework as we jump right on in.
So the first thing that we're actually going to cover is one of the most important concepts that came out of the framework is that literacy is not expertise. And the framework, the Department of Labor is not advocating for the technical training of all workers. Instead, the goal is just effective, responsible, and informed use of AI. So when you're thinking about it, if you compare, digital literacy, so employees are using technology effectively and safely without understanding the underlying code, or you're not becoming a software engineer. Similarly, if you're thinking about like internet literacy, you can find and evaluate information that's available on a website. That doesn't mean that you're building websites or managing a network. AI literacy is almost identical to that. It's understanding how AI works, its benefits and appropriate uses. It's not becoming an AI developer. And so the framework seeks practical competency, not the technical mastery. And it's important for employers, especially concerned with burdens about training, right? Like there's a very big difference between training employees how to appropriately use AI and training employees on how to be an AI developer. So again, kind of in that same theme of the difference between AI literacy and AI expertise, the framework draws a very clear distinction. You need to be literate, you don't need to be an expert. For example, like you don't need to know how an engine works in order to drive a car. Same thing is applying here for this AI framework. AI literacy is focusing on understanding the capabilities, what AI can and can't do, understanding the limitations of that, evaluating the outputs, and then applying the human judgment and using AI responsibly. So, whereas AI expertise instead is focusing on building systems, training the models, developing algorithms, developing the actual technology. Most employers need literacy, not expertise. So, from an AI takeaway or an attorney takeaway is that clients don't need to create AI engineers. Instead, clients need to have employees capable of using AI appropriately.
Karen, that's such a really good distinction. And I think about how, when we think about how workforces changed, maybe an employee used to clock in by having like a manual punch card, and now employees might have an app on their phone where they can check in, right? The employer is going to teach the employee and train that employee how to use the app, but not how the app functions and all of those things. So that's really, really critical in an important distinction as we talk about this AI literacy framework and the difference between the expertise versus getting that piece there.
Well, and I think that's a great description of that too, right? Like no one knew how the actual time card that you punched in worked machine either. You don't need to know how the app works. You just need to know how to function and utilize the app.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Department of Labor's AI literacy framework was released on February 13th of this year. Happy early Valentine's Day, I guess, from the Department of Labor. They love employees so much. This is what they gave them. And again, this is a roadmap for employers, workforce development organizations, educators, and training providers with the primary focus of getting those organizations prepared to help their employees use AI responsibly and effectively. Again, not focused on technical development, but really focuses on this practical use capability and what we're looking at there, with the goal of making sure that our employees are as competitive and competent in this space as they can be. So we're building this AI ready workforce, focusing really heavily on economic mobility, lifelong learning. Now, you're going to hear Karen and I say this a lot. This is a framework. This is guidance. This is not a mandate. This is not a law. There's not going to be some fun regulations that come from this. This really is just a framework and guidance document from the Department of Labor on creating this AI literacy. And so as we go to the next slide, we look at what the framework has as compared to what our employer responsibilities are. So the framework really focuses on some key components that we're going to dig into later as we go through this webinar, but those really look like workforce training, AI literacy, skills development, and workforce readiness. This is the roadmap that the Department of Labor recommends, but it is not the actual implementation piece. That's the part that's left to employers. So employers are still going to have this obligation for governance, for privacy, for security, for compliance. So those pieces are still going to need to be critically important important for an employer as we go through this. But the DOL framework is looking at kind of a roadmap. Like, let's get you there, and you've got to decide how we're going. What are we packing in the car? What kind of car are we taking? What time of day are we leaving? If we think about this as a road trip, those are some of the critical questions. So if it doesn't discuss governance, privacy, security, and compliance, let's talk about what it does discuss as we go to the next slide here. So the framework focuses on, again, as I said, this training, workforce readiness, upskilling, and adoption. Those employee responsibilities are still going to be on those privacy, security, risk management, those good hygiene things about AI that we hope that have already been in development, that you really have been moving about or changing. And if those are things that haven't been in development in an organization, really encourage you to jump into getting those in place. The literacy aspect of this is really designed to be complementary to the governance structure here, with the thought that good training alone is not going to be enough. Our policies are not going to be enough. Our employees are going to need both. In my mind, it's almost like I can't make my hands do a shaking hands, but they are almost like a hand in hand approach when we think about what it is to do. Again, this is not a regulation. This is guidance. And now, an interesting thing about this is that this guidance does not talk about or does not address concerns around bias mitigation, discrimination concerns, or other topics that we have seen that really dominate this conversation around AI. You're not going to find that in the framework. Again, that's going to be likely some of that governance compliance piece that the DOL is saying employers are going to need to be focusing on. And we'll talk in a moment about how this differs from the Biden administration's approach to AI that came out during, of course, that administration. But when we're looking at this, again, really focusing on that literacy piece. Next slide, please. So the focus when we talk about workforce readiness, and I feel like as an employment lawyer, I spend not as much time talking about workforce readiness, fully aware of that, but that's not something I feel like we spend a lot of time on in the compliance space. But that is really the focus of this DOL framework. Less emphasis on restriction. That has been one of the big kind of communication pieces when we think about all the different stories that have been coming about AI since its kind of strong proliferation into our workforce. There has been thought on restriction and guardrails and the things that we need to be doing to kind of minimize the use. The DOL framework looks at maximizing what this might look at. And you'll see in our materials, we talk about the different kind of differences that you'll see between this and the Biden administration's approach. Now, the Biden administration's approach was also effectuated through an executive order because this DOL framework is kind of following an executive order from the Trump administration. The Biden administration also had one, and that one really heavily focused on creating almost a national compliance plan. When we talk about things like there was going to be reports to the federal government about how employers had tested and utilized AI to ensure it wasn't going to have any bias or discrimination or negative impacts. Those were going to be reporting structures that were going to need to be there. The need for policies and practices and procedures and all of that. That's not what we'll see when we talk about this particular framework. This really is a more expansive approach to how we would be doing this. So the DOL defines AI literacy as a foundational set of competencies that is going to enable individuals to use and evaluate AI technologies responsibly. So its focus is again on practical use. As Karen said, this isn't coding. This isn't understanding what's under the hood. This is we get in the car and we know that it drives, but we know how to use it appropriately, right? We know that we need turn signals. We know that if it rains, we should probably put on our windshield wipers. We don't understand and know how that works and the inner workings of the intermittent thing, although that would be something I'd be very curious about is understanding how they envelop it. I think there's a movie on that. Maybe I can get AI to summarize that for me. Um, but that literacy piece means that our employees are going to need to understand the capabilities of AI, understand the limitations, how we should use that information. Now, I will say the primary focus when we talk about the AI literacy is on generative AI, but we know AI broadly is algorithmic learning, algorithmic use. But the focus on this DOL framework really is on generative AI. And so when you think about that in how you're advising employers, how you might be working internally in your own workspaces, think about other aspects of AI that maybe aren't generative that you also might need to be thinking about here. But here's our, kind of primary focus here.
So the actual foundation itself lists 5 core concepts, and we're going to do a deep dive into each one of these, but sort of as the preview for them. The first concept was just understanding AI principles. It's understanding AI's core concepts, the capabilities, limitations, and creating the foundation for effective use. The second is exploring AI uses. And when you're thinking about that, that's directly exploring the different types of AI tools and relevant use cases and how AI can complement human expertise. The third is directing AI effectively. And I think that people basically summarize this as like prompting, right? But it's more than that. It's understanding how to provide the right context to AI and how to create clear prompts that produce effective outputs. The fourth foundation is the evaluation of the AI outputs, being able to assess what AI generated, the results for accuracy, for relevance, and understanding how to then iterate what comes out of the AI outputs to generate additional outputs in a fashion that is most helpful for you. And then finally, the last foundation is using AI responsibly. And this is using AI in ethical and secure ways, protecting critical information, and ensuring accountability for outcomes. The Department of Labor considers these to be the core sort of baseline competencies and capabilities for workers. The framework is built around these 5 competencies. It's designed to create the baseline of capabilities across an entire workforce. And then these competencies sort of build on top of one another. Simply put, it's not about understanding AI, it's more about how you're also using, directing, evaluating, and then using the AI responsibly. So if you think about it in stages, you're thinking about it as, do you understand AI? Are you using AI? Are you appropriately directing AI? Are you then evaluating the results that are coming out of it? And are you governing your own use? So for employers, training should address all 5 of these issues. If you're focused only on how to appropriately prompt, which is that, again, directing AI effectively, you're missing most of the actual framework. So kind of doing the deep dive as we promised into the first pillar or competency, which is just understanding the AI principle. You need to understand AI's core concepts and capabilities and the limitations in order to create a foundation for effective use. And as you've heard about thus far, this is not doing, this is literacy. This is not knowing how to do it. It's actually the application of it. So employees need to have a practical understanding of how AI works. The framework expressly states that a technical application and expertise is not necessary. So key concepts that employees should understand is AI identified patterns, AI predicting likely responses, and then AI generates an output based on that training data. So employees should understand the limitations of that. That's hallucination, that's incomplete answers, it's outdated information of what's in the system that AI is pulling from, and then again, it's bias in the outputs. So examples of competency include pattern recognition. The AI system generates a response by identifying statistical patterns. in the data, and then the results vary on the output base, even though there could be the same input. Again, it's looking at what are the stats of that data that it's looking at. Capabilities, right? Common AI capabilities include generation of text, analysis of data, recognition of images, across different inputs and outputs in different formats, such as text, audio, and then visual content. It's training and inference. Training builds the AI model to then use large data sets, while inference is how the model generates the output in real time for workplace application. And again, it's just understanding AI principle of understanding what a hallucination is and understanding that there's accuracy within the limitations. AI can produce a confident but incorrect output. It's critical that you verify the results that it makes, and then you avoid over reliance on it. There always just needs to be human somewhere in the design or in the output of it. And other AI principles to understand is that every AI system reflects human decision about the data, the goals, the parameters, and that it's requiring users to understand where human judgment is essential. So examples, AI, it conveniently can invent legal citations. We've all heard about those cases. It can fabricate sources. It's an important concept that AI is not actually objective, and rather that human decisions influence the training of the data and the output. That's where we talk about things like bias. Other important concepts is make sure that we're not over-relying, because that creates a legal or a business risk. So if you have AI create a policy, you can't over-rely on that policy, because what happens if the language within that policy is inconsistent with company practices? The second AI competency is exploring AI uses, and that's directly exploring the AI tools and the relevant use cases across real-world work settings and how AI can complement the human expertise. The Department of Labor feels that workers benefit from exposure to practical applications, and that illustrates how AI tools can support tasks, augment decision-making, and streamline work streams. Because AI use varies widely based on industry, occupation, and context of exploration based on familiarity and judgment, by helping workers recognize when and how to apply AI effectively and where human input remains essential. So employees should understand where AI creates value, and the Department of Labor is encouraging experimenting and exploration. The Department of Labor specifically says that you should have productivity and tools. So use AI to draft written documents, to create presentations, to analyze reports, and to allow workers to move more efficiently through common tasks within their workforce. You should use AI for things like informational support, leverage AI to answer questions, to surface relevant background information, or create learning content tailored to specific workforce needs. And then creative assistance, such as generating initial drafts of marketing copies, naming ideas, graphic options. Every single graphic in this presentation, Sheila, I absolutely used AI to create. Use this to just work through your job and make it a little bit easier. And then use it in creative ways to assist workers to refine and improve tasks. Task-specific applications that the Department of Labor is thinking about is applying AI to solve targeted problems, such as writing code or snippets, transcribing audio, automating data entry, or organizing complex scheduling. And then using decision supporting systems, such as generating recommendations, doing risk assessments, forecasting information that can augment human decision making. Again, common workplace uses of this that the Department of Labor is thinking about is drafting emails, summarizing meetings, creating presentations, research assistance, data analyst stuff. Legal examples is drafting first rounds of materials, summarizing deposition transcripts, issue spotting, contract review and comparison, particularly between generations or versions of contracts or between different vendors. From an HR perspective, you're thinking about things like job descriptions, interview questions, training content, employee communications, employee survey analysis. The framework recognizes use cases vary by roles and industry, and that the AI should augment that work, but it should not replace the judgment of it. So when we're looking at the third competency, we are looking at directing AI effectively. And this is what we were talking about a little bit before about um, making sure that we're using real world examples. It's more than understanding how to provide the right context to AI, and instead it's how to create clear prompts with effective outputs. The framework is really focused on the quality of the instructions. So providing background information with the intended tone, the audience, specific goals help shapes AI's response in better matching the user's needs in the different workplace scenarios. So this is about, again, that prompting. This is what so much people think of as that AI prompting. This is about prompting clearly, using step-by-step instructions, using specific formats or outputs to allow workers to unlock and take advantage of it. It's reading that output back, perhaps supplementing or supplying other additional relevant input data so that way they understand what's coming out of it and doing different iterations of those outputs. It's about avoiding vague or misleading prompts. And workers should recognize how to prompt clarity and word choice affect the outcome, and then adjust their approach based on what those outputs look like to avoid ambiguity. So generally speaking, better prompts generally produce better outcomes. So effective prompting includes clear instruction, relative context, desired format, and then a definition of an audience. So for example, a very poor prompt is write a PTO policy. A better prompt is create a PTO policy for a multi-state employer with employees in California and include compliance considerations and manager responsibilities. The framework encourages different iterations of that. A user should be ready to refine their prompts, ask for follow-up questions, clarify output. So in that situation, if you forgot to say that you needed specifically a multi-state, when you get that output originally, it's not going to go cross-country. So instead, you would want to then modify your output to include the multi-state example. So primary legal takeaways is effective prompting improves efficiency, and effective prompting, though, doesn't eliminate the need for review. There still needs to always be that human in the loop.
So, excuse me, I'm going to talk about the fourth competency here, and I'll tell you this is arguably the one that is most important, but also the one that gives me the greatest heartburn because as an employment lawyer, human judgment is where a lot of our work comes on the line, is reliance on the good judgment or poor judgment of a manager, supervisor, or an employee. But this fourth competency repeatedly and consistently emphasizes that there has to be human judgment in evaluating the outputs, that we should not just accept outputs blindly, that there should be an evaluation of accuracy, completeness, reliability, and appropriateness. All of those things we know are challenges, I think, sometimes for employees in a workforce. And so when we talk about how you develop that literacy and competency around that, you can think of it as having a basic checklist of what we would want to see. Is what we're seeing accurate? Is it current? Is it complete? Is it consistent with company practices? Does it make sense? Right? And so that requires the employee or the person dealing with this to really engage with the results that AI is providing with them to make sure that there is alignment. One of the ways that I see, especially when I get stuff from employers that I can tell is generated from AI, and if it's with clients that I have been dealing with for a long time, one of the things that I will sometimes point out is this consistent with your company culture and your voice and your practices, right? Because AI, while it's a learning model and you can put more into it, it's always an interesting flag for me when I get something and it says, hey, we're going to implement this. And I'm like, well, we talked about this a couple years ago and this was not a direction we wanted to go in. Should we talk about this more? And you can see sometimes a light of, I forgot about that, or I didn't think about that. But so having to engage with the output to make sure it makes sense, it's complete, it's accurate. Karen, has talked about, we've seen in the legal sense, these fake case citations, setting aside the fact that apparently AI thought lawyers were just making up words to support our actions, because I have no idea why else it would make up these fake case citations. But when we think about other things like incorrect legal standards, having outdated regulatory guidance, those types of pieces are baked in sometimes into AI models. That's also a little fun thing I like, is when you can tell an employee has used AI to write something to send in, and you're like, that's not what the law says. Like that's not even close. It's adorable that we've tried that, but that's actually not what it says, right? But thinking through and looking at that, with HR, we might see things where there's inaccurate handbook language. There could be improper leave guidance. Like Karen gave a really great example of asking those information, asking AI for this information about setting up a policy, a multi-state employer, throwing in California because all of the laws, you guys know, are very special and nuanced here in California, right? Thinking through that, you could have improper guidance that comes through AI because maybe it read a blog post that said it would be super great if they did this in California, and it interpreted that as actually a thing that's being done in California. So really engaging and thinking through that and checking on those pieces. The other thing that can be really problematic as we think about this from a go forward standpoint, while again, this AI framework does not focus on the bias piece and any type of discrimination, we do still have to have that human element of evaluating that. And so, if our HR departments are using AI to come up with disciplinary recommendations, AI's memory is kind of small unless you load the whole universe of all the employment decisions. You could end up with some inconsistent disciplinary recommendations. So really engaging and thinking outside of just the response that you get from the prompt is something that's going to be critically important when we think about how people who are interacting with AI are able to evaluate AI outputs. At no point are we going to be able to delegate full responsibility to AI. And so, as an attorney providing guidance in that area, you really have to make sure that there's full awareness that we're not delegating accountability in this space. The fifth competency focuses on using AI responsibly. Um, we've got to be thinking through what are our organizational policies, our appropriate uses that we have for AI, our prohibited uses, and how we're handling data requirements. We talk about this a lot in the legal context, in the compliance context. One of the largest and kind of primary concerns about AI, especially ones that aren't operating in kind of a closed environment, is if you're feeding the model's reading this information. So don't put confidential or proprietary information in the model. But do we have policies and practices about how our employees are using various tools that we may have? Are there confidentiality concerns? We've got to be thinking through obviously protecting this sensitive, important communication. Another thing that is coming about, and we're seeing this rapidly changing in the law, is privilege concerns as it relates to the use of AI. There have been a number of cases that have addressed the issue about the use of AI and continued privilege around prompts, right? So there was a criminal case where an individual put in some information he received from his attorney to ask, an AI platform some information about whether it agreed with the attorney's advice or not. And a court ruled that the prompts that the person had put in were discoverable by the other side. And so, suppose there's a client, I killed someone today. Can I plead down to aggravated assault? Right? That would be problematic in front of a jury. We think about this in employer employee context. And I talk about this when I present on AI training. If we have an HR manager that says, I really don't want to give FMLA leave to this person, how do I avoid that? Right? That's a very specific prompt. It gets us the answer that we would be looking for. It hits all of those competencies, But then that becomes maybe a non-privileged communication. They said, Sheila and Karen told me that this was going to be a problem from an FMLA standpoint, but I don't agree with the legal advice. What do you think? That could potentially become discoverable and privileged. And so thinking about, again, how we are training and engaging with those employees on how they put in information. Again, all of these things really work together. What does that involved prompting? How do we have the protection of sensitive and confidential information that we might have? So, some key questions that we want employees to be able to ask as they're developing this literacy and interacting with this content is, am I permitted to use AI for this specific task? Is this okay? And if the first line, if they cannot answer that question, then we need to be thinking about our policies and practices. The next one, am I entering confidential information? That needs to be a question for the employee. Am I putting in the specific 11 herbs and spices for the KFC chicken recipe? Am I putting in the secret recipe for Coke? Can I do that? The employee needs to be able to interact and engage and understand what that looks like. Can I verify the output? Is there a way that I can understand and figure out where that particular source is coming from? Employee also needs to be able to ask themselves, are they accountable for the result that they are receiving? So this framework is really going to focus on the human responsibility continuing and remaining from the AI output and results. Again, this AI use is not going to transfer accountability. Employees are not going to be able to say or should not be able to say, and we got to create a culture where they can't say, well, the AI told me to do it. I put it in the system and that's what the system told me, right? It's going back to that adage of, well, if everybody was jumping off a bridge, would you jump off the bridge? That is what we're looking at here in some of those instances. So the key takeaway here from an attorney practice perspective is, are we ensuring that our literacy programs are aligning with our governance policies? They have to work hand in hand. Here's my awkward handshake again. They have to work hand in hand when we're talking about the framework here.
And so that is the five foundational areas and the kind of framework of that. The other part that the framework covers is the 7 delivery principles. And again, the common theme of this is that practical learning over theoretical learning. The framework is really discouraging one-time awareness training or generic AI training. And instead, it's encouraging these hands-on, continuous learning, interactive courses, and very like role specific. I think it says a lot that the Department of Labor went through the time frame or the tasks of creating 5 core foundations, but then 7 ways of delivering those core foundations. Like that's clearly their emphasis is really on the delivery principles. And you can see, and for the ease of this, the 7 delivery principles are running down the one side of the screen, and we're just going to dive a little bit bigger detail into each one of those.
And
So
Karen,
the
did the AI tell you that that was going to be the best way for us to consume this information, was to have them up like the whole time, or was that your human
this
decision
is
that you
this
added
was my
today?
This was my human decision based off of the output that it provided me for a graphic. And I decided I hated the changing graphic. So I then changed the prompting to tell it what to do through each time. So human input happening a little bit here on our delivery principles.
Well, and look at the supervisor involvement. Guys, we've done 3 of the 5 competencies just in that interaction. Look at that.
So the first delivery input is to enable experimental learning. And so it's allowing practical, direct, hands-on experience that allows AI skills to be practiced in real world situations. So this is workers building confidence and understanding. That doesn't happen for most people by reading, but rather happens by doing, by using real world context, real world situations to solve for actual tasks. So experiential learning, it accelerates skill development. It helps users understand how inputs shape the outputs. Like we were just talking about, right? Like by generating the graphic, it allowed me to see what that output was and allowed me to go back and help with things like trial and error. It builds a mental model for how to appropriately use work productivity with AI. Hands-on training is also more engaging and more memorable and allows for immediate application of what's being learned. It helps to make it seem more relevant and valuable in day-to-day tasks. And employees learn AI by using AI. So, real world task integration, using AI in real world writing issues. It provides interactive prompt exercises. It gives you the opportunity to see what's happening and consider what your different changes would be. It's giving that live feedback and different iterations. It's allowing you to see that I tried it this way, that didn't work the way that I wanted it to. So now I'm changing my prompt to see what that potential output is. It also gives you an opportunity to do side by side human comparisons. So if you ask a participant or a trainee or an employee to compare what they would have thought the output was versus what AI did, or different iterations of even their own work, it allows them then to build that sort of judgment and kind of disconcernment of what makes sense. And also think about enabling experimental or experiential learning to build upon skill sets, right? Progress at different levels of difficulty. You design training activities to begin at the simplest level of user, and you can choose the volume or the increase level in more complex ways as the user is capable of taking it on. You're not starting at the top of your training program expecting everyone to have the same level of expertise or skill set, and instead you do more of a scaffold type learning. So the Department of Labor is encouraging practice, experimentation, real world exercises. Examples are AI sandbox environments, prompt writing exercises, drafting exercises, AI assisted research projects. I thought about this similar to learning Excel. I don't know about everybody else, but I absolutely hate taking Excel courses where you sit there and you watch somebody be like, and then you click this button, and then you click this button, and then you write this formula. And it's like, I can sit there for an hour and have it make sense. And then you pull up Excel in front of me, and I'm just like, I have no idea what I'm doing again, despite the fact that I just took this hour-long course. And I think that these like hands-on learning that the Department of Labor is recommending as one of the delivery principles really helps employees gain confidence through use. So simply put, reading a policy alone isn't sufficient. And from a legal perspective, you really want to think about how controlled experimentation can reduce the unauthorized use of AI.
That's a really great segue to talking about how we want to look at this second delivery principle, which is embed learning in context. And for this, you really need to ensure that you are tailoring AI to the specific job or industries. Employees are going to learn AI by using AI. And so, what this may mean is that when you have the full force of all of your vendors wanting to provide you with AI tools, training, all of those things, you really want to make sure that you're vetting those out and you're not just getting an off the shelf type of context. Because if someone is making a widget, and they are a widget maker and they need to understand how AI is helping with whatever tools and tasks they are with widgets. They don't need an AI example that has Excel in it, right? Karen's example was timely and relevant because she uses AI in her daily life. Uses Excel in her daily practice, probably more than we want because we're lawyers. We didn't really want to do the whole math thing, but nevertheless, here we are, right? So it makes sense because that is part of how she is working. It would not make sense if she was watching a video on how to, run a manufacturing line or how to build a widget, right? So we want to make sure that we're embedding that current learning in context of someone's actual job so that they're able to do that. And we're thinking about how this integrates into our existing training programs. How are we using this to augment and supplement the training that we are seeing? Karen, tell us about the next two delivery principles.
Yeah, so I'm going to hit two of them here. And Sheila, in a way that you totally predicted, I'm going to talk too long and we're going to run out of time. So I'm being mindful of that. Covering principles three and four. The third principle is building complementary human skills. So this is thinking about how certain human skills can be more important in an AI embedded workplace. And so that's again critical thinking, judgment, creativity, communication, and problem solving. Employees need to be able to evaluate the output, identify errors, be able to apply it to business context, and then exercise discretion. AI may generate the content, but again, that human being is still responsible for that decision base. The fourth delivery principle from the Department of Labor is to address the prerequisites for AI literacy. So, not all employees are beginning from the same starting point. The framework recognizes that the barriers exist to AI literacy, such as limitations to literacy, access to the technology, lack of training opportunities, and then just confidence in the use of that technology. So employers should be able to assess the readiness before even rolling out, figure out where your workforce is, what their capabilities are, what potential barriers exist. If there is a broadband connectivity issue, make sure that you're not running software programs or AI systems that cause a delay or lag within those systems. So again, it's just about considering access to that, to success within some of the existing literacies.
Thanks, Karen. I'm gonna pop through five, six, and seven quickly because we want to get you guys to our five tips at the end. So, delivery principles five, six, and seven talk about how we are going to kind of fully integrate this. Delivery principle is five is creating pathways for continued learning. So, this is not a one-time training. This is probably not a single annual training. When we're talking about, we do those refresher trainings every year on discrimination and harassment. If you're not doing them every year, you need to also do those every year. That's your free separate piece of information today. So we really want to create a robust training and learning system that supports deeper or specialized skills so that we can really get a deeper understanding of how we can utilize AI. We also want to make sure that we're preparing our leadership to lead. Our managers, coaches, team leaders, those folks need to be trained separately and they need to be trained on what they need to be looking for from a governance standpoint, a compliance standpoint, and a use standpoint, right? They cannot be, caught flat-footed and not understanding what is going on when they're trying to manage their workforce. And that is a consistent policy and practice for manager and training development when we're talking about leads. And then our last delivery principle that we see from the Department of Labor is designing for agility. We want to make sure that this is a very nimble process. As we have seen, AI is continuing to grow and change at a rapid pace. The chat GPT that we were introduced to about 3 years ago, or maybe it was a little longer, is not the same chat GPT of today. It's not Claude. It's not all of those things that have really come about. And so there needs to be some regular training updates. You want to have some modular content that you can frame and move about. And incorporate feedback from your workforce. How is this working? Does this make sense for you? Is this helpful for you? Are you able to fully utilize this in a way that makes sense and that's helpful to you?
So when we're thinking about where is your organization today, we start with leveling it in, there's five different levels. The first is the organization is using little to no AI. The second level is that employees are using it informally, but there's often no policies or oversight. And this is the one that keeps Sheila and I up at night, and frequently is the one we see most often. Level three is that there's approved tools and therefore limited governance. Four is this kind of the goal of what we're talking about here. It's the formal training, it's policies in place. And then obviously, five is the gold standard, which is an enterprise AI strategy with the appropriate governance. What we are finding more often than not is that employers think that they're at level one, right? Which is there's little to no AI use happening. But the reality is that they're actually at level two, where there's the kind of AI is being used informally. There's no regulations over it. There's no oversight away from it. So the key step here is to sort of assess where you currently are before you move forward with any AI initiative. And that's what we're talking about here is that the framework wasn't simply theoretical, it's actually encouraging action. The Department of Labor is giving some pretty solid action steps of what to take. And when we're implementing the themes, we're talking about assessing use, addressing concerns, building training, developing policies, training leaders, and continued learning. So employees don't need to be perfect at AI programs before you start. You need to think about it as sort of incremental progress. Think of it again, we're talking about this roadmap. It's a roadmap, not a destination. So, how are we going to do that? The first thing that we're going to do is we are going to assess the current state of AI use. So figure out where AI is or is not currently being used. I think a common mistake is that people create policies before they figure out what their actual use cases are. You need to consider things like what is happening in HR, legal, marketing, operations, customer services, and then identify opportunities, risks, and training needs. So from a legal perspective, governance should be based off of the actual use, not the hypothetical use. And Sheila, I know we're running low on time, but I just want to acknowledge that I actually have a corgi that looks exactly like this graphic. And so I asked this graphic to create this because I loved that the corgi was jumping hurdles for addressing employee relation hurdles. And I feel like he hasn't barked yet. And I feel like this is my shout out to him for being a good job during this presentation.
Well, there you go. I was trying to figure out and have been trying to figure out in the graphics why there was a random corgi in here. So thank you for providing that context. And now anyone else who's listening understands why there's a random corgi
He's
jumping a
jumping
hurdle.
hurdles.
The second step is addressing the employee relations hurdles. And sometimes this is a spot, especially if you are in compliance, that is not readily within your lane of focus because we're looking at compliance, got to get it right, got to get it right. But especially with AI, but all of the things that we do with our employees, we really need to understand what employee relations hurdles we may have here. And the DOL framework specifically recognizes that there is an emotional resistance to AI. There is a lot of fear and concern around job displacement, reduced value, increased monitoring, skill obsolescence. So there's a lot that goes into this. And one thing that I will tell you, and I always tell people this about practicing employment law, is that when you think about a person's job, that is top three of things that are most important to them and establishes their self-worth more often than not. You have themselves, their family, and then their job, which is why I don't do criminal law and I don't do family law, but I will happily do employment law. Those are the top three things when you think about something that is core to a person and how they view themselves and fitting in the world, how they provide for their families, how they do all of these things. There is a strong emotional tie to how you are viewed in the workplace and AI being a threat to that. So really attacking that and providing reassurance and guidance and communication to your employee workforce about the employee relations aspect of it, assuaging those fears that may be coming about. And part of that is having a plan in place as to what that all is going to look like so you can communicate that. And one of the key pieces to really hammer home is something that Karen and I have hammered home throughout this presentation is there still needs to be human oversight. There still needs to be human judgment and human accountability. I know we are got like less than a minute left. We're going to pop through these last three steps for you. So if you guys can just bear with us for a few more minutes, we'll get you out and fully presented on this framework. Go ahead, Karen.
So the third step then is to build training and policy infrastructure. And again, this is just about developing or updating AI training programs, focusing on tools for workers that they actually are using, and then creating policy and data protection, verification, prohibited use, accountability. This is about acceptable use, prohibited use, confidentiality, data protection, verification requirements, what employees can do and what employees can't do. And again, the Department of Labor is talking about practical emphasis and practical use.
Step 4 is preparing your leaders and growth pathways. So, this is making sure that our leaders understand what our organizational expectations are, the governance requirements, how they escalate procedures, and then just basics. Can our employees use AI? When AI should be used? What requires review? And here we've got to remember that leaders have to lead. So I think there's also sometimes a perception that maybe people don't want to admit that they've used AI before too. So you've got to deal with that perception as well. So thinking about what does our pathway for learning and development look like for our leaders? And then do we have growth pathways? Is there advanced training? Are there specialized AI skills that we can have? Are there emerging roles that should be developed within our organization as a result of the adoption of AI, the use of AI as we grow and develop in AI? So, this leadership readiness really is going to be key to the implementation success. And so, it's got to start at the top, it's got to start with our leaders and how we're doing this.
So the fifth and final thing that employers can do to kind of adjust and deal with the Department of Labor's foundations here is consider external partnerships. So particularly valuable for small employers or employers in early adoption stages of the journey through AI is look for external partnerships. Who has pre-existing training resources? Do you have a vendor that can provide training for you? Is there industry specific groups, community college? There's all kinds of free AI educational resources that are actually included within our article, Sheila, that talk about different spots of just learning thresholds, and whether that's learning for the members of the decision makers of your organization in order to start deciding where they want to go with that path, or whether that's for resources for your actual employees to utilize.
Yep. So some key takeaways as we in this presentation, and thank you for your time here today, is we want to be thinking about the DOL framework. Again, framework, not mandate, but framework is a workforce development roadmap. The focus is on literacy and not regulation. How do we get these employees to be competent? The 5 competencies that we talked about are understanding AI, exploring AI, how we direct AI, how we evaluate those outputs, and then how we're going to use AI responsibly. We talked about those 7 principles that are providing a roadmap for effective training, but at its core, the one of the key takeaways here is that the framework still must have human judgment, human oversight, and human accountability. We know that this training, this framework, and our existing governance structures or our building governance structures need to work together as they go down this path together. And for us as attorneys, there are significant opportunities to provide guidance, advice, and counsel on literacy, governance, policy development, responsible AI adoption. Karen and I spend most of our days talking about this with employers and getting those folks there. So AI literacy is going to be something that is increasingly becoming a workforce competency, not just a technical specialty. So we really want to make sure that we are focused on that. Karen and I thank you so much for your time and attention today. This has been super fun for us. We've got some materials that were dropped in the chat for you. Please don't hesitate to utilize those. Reach out to us if we have any questions, or if you have any questions for us that we can help support you with. But thank you guys so much for your time today.
Thank you, everyone.
This concludes today's presentation. Thank you so much, Karen and Sheila, for an excellent presentation today. And thank you so much to our audience for joining us. Have a great day, everyone.